Honestly, I was running away from home. I was literally running away from South Africa because the mood, I was too angry. And I couldn't make excuses for this structural violence that was happening. I couldn't make excuses for it. And not just for myself, but just in general. And I always feel like being in Johannesburg, you need like a few crocodile skins. You need like layers and layers and layers. And I wasn't okay with my layers anymore. It just they were too heavy. I couldn't breathe. The best way to deal with what was happening in the country and the best way to understand me in my own country might have been to move out, to find a space where I can do my master's. I was also aware that my thinking that it is possible for me to leave, I was aware of the privilege in that. But that also does not mean that I didn't understand how difficult it would be to get into Europe. So being both, I don't know, is the word underprivileged or whatever, that's such a, especially in South Africa it gets used anyway, just understanding that in terms of Europe being an African, being female, being black, not being rich would be a barrier, but also understanding that within South Africa I was to a certain extent rich, educated, spoke a certain way, moved within a certain circle that was fluid. If I'm at my grandmother's space, which is in Lotlakane, and that's in Mafikeng, things are very different. But if I move back to SA, that's not where I'd be living. If I'm in my mother's space, which is in Klerksdorp, that's also different, but that's not where I'd be moving to. So if I moved back to South Africa, I'd be living in Johannesburg, which is a city that I really love. It's my favorite city in the world. My plan is that eventually I'll go back and I would have dealt with whatever, and I'll have the tools, and I'll have the language, I'll have whatever to be able to still be mad and whatever, but still be able to work. At this point, just the rage mixed with apathy, mixed with moments of wanting to cry and moments of there's just so much going on that I'm sometimes like, I can't work. And like, I know that a lot of people feel like that and have found a way to deal with it. And now I'm like, oh, it's so much. Sometimes I feel like because the topics that I'm dealing with are so heavy and they're emotional, it's almost like constant therapy. There's like a lot of reading that's just like heavy. Right now I'm reading Tell Freedom by Peter Abrams, and for me it's heavy because just reading that poverty, I recognize it. I haven't lived in a situation where I was hungry, but I lived in a space where the people that I played with and the people that I knew were hungry. What I've really liked with being in Berlin is that it has felt like a 6-year residency. Maybe it's also time to acknowledge the uncomfortableness I have with speaking about this because of things that remain unsaid, because there are many different types of leaving, and I have a very specific kind of leaving. I wasn't forced out. I still have a home to go back to. It's by choice. I go back to South Africa 2 or 3 times in a year. There's like all those things. So even though I'm not rich, there's an upward mobility that comes with a position that I occupy. Not a lot of black people can afford that, especially in South Africa. And please don't bring up the 0.1% of black people who can afford to do that. As to say, yes, there's some black people who can do it. No, we're not going to talk. Please do not derail the topic. But anyway, so there's a certain, I don't belong to that certain type of people. I am the 0.1% of black people who can do what I'm doing. Until at least 3 years ago, I remember I had to renew my passport, and you had to, at the embassy, I had to fill in where you stayed, like where is home, and I was like South Africa, and then I had to refill in the form because they were like, no, you live here in this bit. If home was in South Africa, you would be, if you lived in South Africa, this form would be filled in South Africa. So because you live here, you have to put in your address here. This is where you live. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll fill it in, but I don't live here because I need the passport. So it was a bit of a, so now I can't pretend that I don't live here. I'm like, okay, I live here for now.
Is it home?
Yes, it's home for now. I'm always like, for now. The times when I feel like I'm hiding out in Berlin, I think I once mentioned it, and that I also know that it's not really sustainable. I could speak the language better than I do now. And when I was learning it, I realized that I was very resistant to learning the language. And it was also because of colonization. I'm told I say that wrong all the time.
We all understand it though.
Yeah.
To say the C word.
Yeah, I probably say it wrong because I want to bastardize the word. But anyway, because of the C word. Because of how English and Afrikaans were introduced to me, because of how colonial languages were like forced down my throat, and all of that was like I wanted to learn it, but there was something physical that's like, I really don't want to learn this language. And just having moments on the tram where racist incidences would be happening and you're feeling really afraid for yourself and afraid for somebody else, and then walking and somebody screams something in German and I'm like, I'm so glad I have no idea what you just screamed. Like, I don't want to know what it is. I don't even want to, I'm going to pretend like you are not even talking to me. So being able to not engage. It is safer than South Africa, but I do occupy the body that I occupy. So when 3 white guys come down the road, I scan the space. I see who is behind them. Can I cross the street? If something happens, who could be an ally? Things like that happen automatically. And unlike a white person clutching their bag from an imaginary whatever, this is real. It's not comparable. A lot of the strategies are not academic. They're not things that I consciously think about. the intersection of race and gender obviously matters, but somehow in this space race is more that which is communicated is more about the race. And I'm also aware of the fact that sometimes my overexposure to racism makes you a little bit, and I try not to do that. I try to have the armor and not expect it first, have it come first and then react to it. Maya Angelou likes quoting, I'm forgetting his name. He says something like, I am human, therefore nothing human can be alien to me. And it's the idea that when you completely understand that phrase, you can never say of anything that a human has done, oh, I can't do that. Whether it be something really, really great or something really, really horrible. And that's why I'm saying, yeah.
What does that mean about arriving in a place like this and having the challenges that one, I suppose, inevitably faces with regards to racism and other sort of arrival issues, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, but these challenges, I had them in South Africa, so at least here I can pretend like I don't understand the language. Can't do that at home. Who I am is very connected to South Africa. My memories, the way I speak, the music that I'm connected to, the things that have informed who I am are very much connected to South Africa. I claim it as my own. I'm like, that is my country. There is that thing that is like, this is mine. It belongs to me. And it's not just, I think it's important to mention that it's not just a personal history. There's a history that is not just a personal history. I will not allow them to erase me. That's the thing. I'm like, you will not erase me. It's my country. We were here. You did not discover me. It has a lot to do with fighting back against Jan van Riebeck putting a flag on a moon called Cape of Good Hope and saying, we own this, and then the British coming and saying, we own this too, and then so that's why I'm like, it's my country.
The one aspect is just how people perceive you, how you possibly change perceiving yourself in a new context. But then these things about being somewhere else, and just because the numbers are different, I don't know how many in your specific field of art making in Berlin here are of darker shade in the performance art of your generation, blah, 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 that you become the one representative of. And that, do you find that a challenge, that in your work you need to kind of compensate for it then representing something bigger than just your work as Lerato Shadi?
I think that's what my work is about, actually. Because when I started making work, I realized that it didn't matter what the content was about. It was always, the question always had to do with my being a black female. That was somehow always in the way. And then I decided, actually, I am a black female and I'm not going to apologize for it. And then I started really thinking about it. I started thinking, what do you mean actually by me speaking about the black female experience? What does that mean? You read Catcher in the Rye and they're not like, you know what, that's a quintessential white male experience in a private school. It's everything I read about why you should read Catcher in the Rye was like, this is what the high school experience is or whatever. You're like, no, it's not mine. No, it's a very particular experience which is not mine. So my work, I think a lot has to do with that. Like, I am going to own my particular experience, and I'm going to add that narrative to the narratives. I'm going to complicate whatever narrative is out there about Black females by adding my own narrative to it. That's the one thing. The current works have a lot to do with historical erasure and how I experience it as violence, and many experiences have been erased. And because I'm trying to speak particularly from a space that I know, and owning that and trying not to erase other people. I remember doing a TEDx talk, and somebody came to me and said that, it's not including, I forgot what he said, it's not including. And I was like, that's because I can't speak for that. I cannot speak to that experience. And the difference with, or at least I hope the difference with a white supremacist narrative with mine is that I'm not excluding other experiences. Because that one does that. It says, this is what is natural. Everything else is marginal. The white male voice is valid too. I'm not trying to undo it. That voice is valid. It just is not my center. And it's not everybody's center. And it's saying that everyone's voice is valid, including mine, and it's valid on the same scale. And I think that's also why, for me, it's also somehow important to claim the body that I come in. Because of this body, I've been told that because you inhabit the body that you do, your voice is less valid. And I'm like, no, it doesn't matter what body I inhabit or what body anybody else inhabits. That voice is just as equally valid as mine is. The industry is sort of the same everywhere around the world, isn't it? It's like an airport. Sometimes I feel like it's an airport. And of course you have different variations of the industry. Maybe project spaces can have a bit more characters and nuances from the space, but the sort of white cube gallery, whatever spaces, might as well just be, I don't know, airports, I guess. The language is replicated, and that's how it survives. That's the structure. So the bias is the same, or the space where the expectations come from is the same, but the nuances are different, if that makes sense. The same as the structure of the airport is the same, but the way it's built is different. But you sort of find the same things.
Like what?
In sort of the same space. And like in an airport, you find the shops.
No,
you find
okay, I understand how the airport works, but let's talk about your work.
Well, the airport is much easier to describe. There are lifts.
Lots of escalators.
Yeah.
And lots of VIP lounges.
Yes. Which I don't have access to.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
In the apartheid years, that they would only invite one black person to an opening, one black artist to an opening, and the black artist knew whose turn it was to be invited. And sometimes I feel like that sort of happens. And I think that a lot of curators are very, very, very lazy. They don't do their research. and also take what's just there. Like you go to 2 galleries and you say, give me your artist list names, and that's it. And then you go, I've been to South Africa and I did my research. Like, but that doesn't make sense. That's not research. Or also the industry teaches you not to speak about certain things, or to
like what?
To behave in a certain way. I don't know, I think you can be political but in a certain way, but not too political. Bell Hooks has this famous thing about dismantling, is it Bell Hooks or Audre Lorde? About dismantling patriarchy. It's almost like you can speak about patriarchy, but you can't seek to dismantle it. And that's what I mean by the industry. Like, you can speak about racism, but you can't seek to dismantle it. You can't be seriously invested in that, and you can't be seriously invested in finding other ways. Yeah, you can't seriously be invested in dismantling it and figuring out what that means, and discovering how to go about that, making connections and conversations and actions that go towards that. That's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
But you can speak about it. That's very good. And it's in such a way that I know that I don't have power because I need to be invited by a curator. It's not about the project, that the industry understands itself, that brilliance, excellence, relevance comes from a body that is white and male. In 2014, there was an article taking the measure of sexism, which re-looked at like a 1971 article, something like that, that said, why have there been no great female artists? Some of the artists who responded to the contemporary taking the measure of sexism, which was looking at the numbers to see if the numbers had gotten better, called it out and said, the numbers are talking about white women. Mainly. If you look at black women, it's even less. And then if you really are talking properly, then you say, if you look at transgender people, if you look at transgender people of color, if you look at disabled people, if you look at age as well, because there's a lot of ageism in the industry, if you look at class as well, because the structure is such that we don't even see that. It's normal to think that most applications are like up to 35 or up to 40. Most residencies take it for granted that you don't have a family and probably don't even have wheelchair accesses. We don't speak about the fact that a lot of people stop being artists because their sources of funding dry up. So there's like a whole lot of things that we are supposed to go to art gallery openings and pretend like we're just flying around the world and having fun. I can't really try out I don't try out performances per idea, but I tune them. I guess I do try. For example, with Mosako Wanako, I sat for like an hour, 2 hours figuring out how long the knitting takes. I did a lot of tryouts in that sense, like what's the width, crocheting, the redness of the wool, all of those things. But I didn't sit for 60 hours beforehand to try it out. But I made sure that by the time the performance came through, I'd considered all other variations. And also because most of my works are so simple, the colors, there's basically the palette is very, very minimal. Like that's red, white, black, and brown. That's it. There's nothing there. All there is to see is the actions. So because of that, everything else has to be considered. It has to be like really, 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 really simplified to the point that what I'm trying to say makes sense. I don't know if that...
It does make sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
My language is not my first language. Because sometimes putting too many things then takes away, like it's almost like using too many words, and then you end up like how I speak, which is why I think I do performance, because with my spoken word I feel so inarticulate that I feel like the best way for me to speak is through the work that I do, like through performance, through video, through installation, through the artworks that I make. That is how I can best articulate myself. Every time I make work, I consider the context that it's in. I think my work does center my body, because it comes from the idea that the experiences that I have are informed by the body that I occupy in the world. You do not have to occupy the body that I occupy to understand things. You can apply them to your own experiences and how you move through the world, but I think that the themes are very universal. With Makubu, it's the window piece I did for Ineva, and there it was very important that I presented this body working, not performing, but working, putting up an installation. That was the performance. The idea of having a black body on a window front was like, okay, there's a lot in there. I didn't want to deal with the stereotypes by taking the stereotype and putting it on show and saying this is problematic. And when I did the same work in South Africa for the Grahamstown Arts Festival, it wasn't necessary to kind of present a working black female body to the South African audience, because we're kind of used to that in a way. I presented the work itself because it has its own merit without the live body performing. I used to say about Nokayambo Kamuso, the carpet, that it's kind of a monument to a silent labor that makes it possible for us to have spaces of exclusion and privilege. So that speaks directly to the white cube, which are those spaces of exclusion and privilege. So in that space with Seretise, I wanted to have a conversation about how the word implicit in historical erasure, in erasing. I know that when we talk about world history, it's basically mainly Western European kind of white people history. And then that gets framed as world history with little pockets about other people. So here I was like, actually information is available out there, and I know that it's a little bit harder, but how about we consciously try to find it? I wanted to have a conversation where I was like, if you don't know who Sojourner Truth is, it's actually, you should take responsibility for that, for the fact that you don't know, that you should be looking for it, because we know what the system is like. So how about we do a bigger job at fighting it? Like, I didn't know who Ya Asantiwa was, and I'm like, I should have known that. I should know. This is something I should know. And to a certain extent, it is my responsibility to know who she is. Like, I didn't know who Bell Hooks was until what I thought was very late. And I'm like, how can I not know who Bell Hooks or Audre Lorde is? So to kind of have a conversation that says that, okay, yes, I know there are systems and structures in place that make it hard to get this information, but I'm not talking about that now. Let's talk about which bit we can do, what's our responsibility. And what was interesting with those two works is that in Berlin, we even had Ella who was like, no, don't erase the work is, the women's names are written on the wall. It's all women, historical figures, women of color who have done amazing things for world history. These are written on the wall, and the audience is asked to erase that. What was interesting is that in Berlin, people were really reluctant to erase. And then you had one or two people who didn't want to deal with the message. They were like, oh, I can make an anagram. I can erase certain names to make a name. But that was the minority, where they were completely not open to dealing with the work. And then you had people who were like, I really like the work, I get it, but I can't bring myself to erase the name. And you even had a woman who was like, don't erase. You can't be a woman erasing another woman's name. That is so wrong. That is so violent. Don't do it. So there was the audience was really torn. And in Johannesburg, which also, it was great. I think we had a good number of Black people. We had, white people as well, but a really good number of Black people. And what happened is, at the end of the day, the wall was almost erased. People were just almost, I don't want to say happy, but really enthusiastic at erasing a name. And at first I was really confused, and then I started talking to people, and I realized that it's because the idea of historical erasure is not new to them. It's like, yes, this is happening and you're right. I remember talking to someone saying, I forgot what the name was that she had erased, because in South Africa I also had a lot of South African names, and she was like, I know that name, but I don't know what she has done. So that is the name I chose to erase as a commitment to go and find out who she is and why I should know her and why she's important. So that was really great. Or the security guard who I was talking to, and I said, come in, and he's like, no, I can't because I have to stand here. But on his break, he went and erased, and I asked him, what did you erase? And he says, oh, I don't remember the name, but I took a picture so that when I get home, I can really do the research. So that was like, wow, that's great. And that kind of made it made sense to me that yes, there are learning processes that are very different for white people and for Black people, where for us the idea that we're not in world history books is not news. It's like, yeah, we know that. Hence the homework we have to do is very different for people who perhaps don't know, are ignorant to the facts, and their homework is very different. They've always been like an Africa moment, a Turkish moment, a Chinese moment, an Aborigine moment. There's always been moments, and you're like, okay, so now we're in a decolonizing moment. I think it's what you keep saying about language being lazy, and saying, articulate what it is that you're trying to say, that in the use of language especially, that then you end up and possibly unintentionally generalizing. It also feels like a a distraction in a way. Like, oh, we talking, we whatever. But very consciously keeping the power structures the same. Very few of these spaces have conversations with how those power structures are. It's like, okay, we decide, you do the work. We are the money, we are the institutions, come show us your pain. And if we decide to deal with it, maybe we will, maybe we won't. It's, like, we know we have the power. The Colonial Project is so pervasive in terms of everything, in terms of when you pick up a magazine, a newspaper, what you look at when you're walking down the street. And it's not just here, it's also in South Africa on so many different levels. And what, besides the fact that I'm doing my own decolonizing project in terms of what I'm reading and consuming and all of that, I also know that there are moments when I just want to take a break, and then I go back to recolonizing myself. Sometimes I feel like I wish I can make work that has nothing to do with my gender or sexuality.
Louise Mueller-Jones.
Like, really. And I don't know if I can. And I think it's also not just about how, if I made an orange
Elizabeth Catlett
and hang it up in a white cube, then it won't just be an orange. It's not just about that. It's also because these spaces exist within a broader context. And until that broader context, if for some reason, by some magic spell, I could make an orange and it would just be an orange in a white cube, there would still be all of this that exists. So I would still not be able to just make an orange. I somehow don't have the luxury to just make an orange. There's so much happening. I'm like, if I have a voice, I can't just be making an orange.
Charlotte Fortune Grimmig.